Hello Fanami, welcome back to Life and Other Saga Skills, and the latest in our TBR catch-up. We really are making good solid progress now. I'm still not sure if I'll be able to make it to the end of the year and get everything done, but we might do. I'm just looking at it now, and actually we've pretty much just got the back row on each of the 2 shelves left to go. So it is doable if I focus, and generally like autumn and winter, big reading times for me anyway. So yeah, it could be doable. It could be doable. Let us see. Anyway, so today I'm going to jump in and talk to you about the 5th season. I don't even know where to start with this one. It's another one of those. I don't think I knew much about it before I started, and I still don't know where I've ended up, to be honest. I think it's almost more at the sci-fi end of the fantasy genre. I definitely spent at least the first half of the book just trying to understand what they were saying, because it's like, it's a very different world. There's completely sort of unknown mythology, so you're having to learn their terminology, what that means in terms of their world, who these people are, and in that classic thing that happens a lot with these sort of books that I actually hate, is you're jumping between characters narrating different parts of this story. And I find that super frustrating, because I get really into one person and what's happening with them, and then when you suddenly have to like cut somewhere else, I'm like, it's not film. It works really well in a film. It really winds me up in a book. However, as you trawl your way through, you know, your WTF of the first half, you then suddenly begin to realise that there's a number of connections between the different narrators that you are talking to. And when that sort of all starts to come together towards the back end, you're like, oh, okay, I'm feeling this now. I think I sort of get what's going on. And then the book ends. So there are already follow-ups available, and I put them in, you know, that waiting pen I have, otherwise known as the Amazon basket. But I'm now like, what do I do with this one? Because I can't really yet tell if it's a keeper. So I'm sort of wondering whether I finish. Like, I'm not sure if the trilogy actually closes things or if there's more to come after that, but yeah, I'm not sure if I proceed sort of with Kindle books so that I don't have to put other stuff on the shelf, because it may be that once I'm like past the end of this book, I'm like, oh okay, yeah, I feel resolved on that, and then that's it, and then it goes away, because like I enjoyed it once I finally understood what was going on. But I don't know if it's a keeper. So yeah, it's been a very strange experience. Like good but strange, but good but strange. And there were no dragons. There was some form of magic involved, and you know, one of those classic tropes about lots of people being afraid of the people who have magic. And a lot of those people who have magic being brought up to feel that they can't control it, and therefore they are a danger to themselves and everyone else, so they are right to be treated like scum. And then there are just these mysterious obelisks which are sort of floating around in the background of the story, and then you start to sort of see a little bit more of as the story goes on. And you start to get to a point where you're speculating what they mean or what they are or how they connect to things, and then the book ends. So this is what I mean, there's just so much unfinished business here, so much I still need to unravel. that I think I'm more in that space of I want to understand this and complete my understanding of the situation, rather than necessarily, oh, this is one I'm going to want to read over and over again. So yeah, that's maybe where I am. It's been good to chat this out loud. I feel like I've come up with some theories and some thoughts. So yeah, so that's the 5th season then. I'm just going to put that down for now. Next up, is this one, which I think I mentioned in one of the previous TBR videos as something my mum randomly decided to give me. So it's called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. And I was like, what? Why are you giving me this? But she had been raving about it. I'm not sure who started it. Either she started it or someone else started it, but like her and her whole friendship group have been raving about it, and everyone was gifting it to each other. And I have started reading it. I haven't finished, so I will talk to you about it when I finish. But it is, it's mostly an illustrated book with sort of words, a few words incorporated to help you follow the story of these different characters, the boy, the mole, the fox and the horse. You don't meet them all at once, you meet them gradually. And I'll tell you more about that when we are done. So, this one. I think I'm going to eternally keep this by my bed. It's actually worth the hype. I mean, it depends on how you feel about straightforward positive statements or statements that really just put things in perspective, but I respond quite well to that sort of thing, and it's accompanied by all these beautiful drawings, which I think I said before, remind me quite a lot of what you used to get in the original Winnie the Pooh books that I have. It's just there's just something very simple and beautiful about it. I don't know what else to say other than that. It was just lovely. It's lovely. And I can quite understand why everyone is buying it for everyone else. And it's also like just really nice to read something that positive and sweet and beautiful just before you go to sleep. So yeah, feeling really good about that one. Hard act to follow then. So what's next? What's next is Torchwood Exodus Code. I've never read any Torchwood or Doctor Who books, but I was a huge fan of Torchwood, the TV series. But it's one of those where I actually don't know if I'm going to enjoy the book or not. Yeah. I like fantasy as a genre, but sci-fi I can go either way on, so we shall see. But yeah, excited to kick that one off anyway, so I will report back. Meh. Didn't like hate it, but I got about a quarter of the way through and I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna be asked to finish it. Like, it wasn't really, there was a lot of build up for no real payoff. It certainly wasn't as good as some of the Torchwood narratives from the series. Like, it was okay, but don't know what to say about it. There was another potentially world-ending event. Jack stopped it. You met some other characters on the way. Some typical things happened. Meh. Like, I really wanted to like it, and like I said, I didn't hate it, but it's just a bit blah, really, actually. I think even if this narrative had been on film instead of in book form, I think it still would have been a bit blah. So very sorry about that, Barrowmans, but yeah. So anyway, we're moving on to The Rage of Dragons. So as you may recall from when I showed you this coming in, because it was part of a gift, this is a debut novel. It is designed to be part of a series, but actually I'm not sure if the second part has come out yet or not. Hopefully not. So it's like, maybe just need to start with one and not get carried away with the series. Although I do kind of want to move on to the Shadow and Bone books finally after this, so we shall see. Anyway, but yes, I'm excited. The Rage of Dragons, debut fantasy novel for Evan Winter. I'm hoping it's going to be great. I will report back. Okay, so let's talk about this. I had to stop reading. Takes a lot for me to do that, but as you know, I was very excited because dragons, and there seemed to be an interesting new approach to the genre, which there definitely was, and that was good. And I was quite sort of keen, excited to see where that lore was going. However, I kind of felt like, obviously for the bit I read, I didn't read the whole thing, but for the bit I read, it was more battle than it was narrative. And for me, that's just not my kind of thing. Like the narrative, the exciting story flow, the twists and turns is what I really love in a book. But I don't think that was the premise here. I think the premise was to sort of talk about these different cultures that had been created for this book, and almost a little bit Game of Thronesy, where it's about who comes out on top and why, and the progression of different characters. So it's not that it was not well written, it's that it just wasn't really my thing. And after numerous chapters of numerous different battles, I had to call it. I couldn't do it anymore. However, that meant I could bounce onto something else. Which was... Now, this only arrived a couple of weeks ago, and I'd been holding off until I was finished with the Endless Battle Book of Doom. And then when I quit it, I was like, okay, fine, I will go into Bloodmarked. So, as you know, I really enjoyed the first of the trilogy, which was called Legendborn. Bloodmarked is the second in the Legendborn trilogy, and the third book isn't out yet. So I'm now also in this joyous area we love, where you've read the first two books of a trilogy and you then need to wait for the third one to come out. Hopefully with this, it's not going to take too long. It's not going to be like which I love so much, but is currently 2 parts of a 3-part trilogy. It has been for some years. Anyway, we'll move on from that pain. This was as amazing as the first one. Lots of things I didn't see coming, lots of new elements to it. You're still seeing sort of how the Arthurian legend stream is building out versus the ancestral root stream, and how those things cross over. We got to see all of the same old characters, but we got to see some of them in a new light, which was really interesting. As we have left Bree, the central character, she has just realised that ultimately she's the focal point for 2 of these particular lines, and they join and cross in her. So a lot of this book is about her journey to understand that and understand her power. And we learn some really big new revelations, which are not going to be resolved until the next book. So I'm like, come on. Oh, but it was like super good. Read Legendborn, read this, get in the zone. Just amazing. With that done, I have finally moved on to Shadow and Bone. So yeah, I've only just started this, so I will report back to you when I am done, because obviously that's this particular part is a 3-book box set trilogy. There are more books to the whole Grishaverse, but yes, I'm starting with those ones. So yeah, I will report back shortly. Okay, let's talk about this. I was really excited to read this because I had seen the series on Netflix, and I was like, this is very much up my street, and I was not disappointed. I was already aware that what they'd done with the Netflix show was actually combine various different parts of different streams of books that Leigh Bardugo has written. So in Shadow and Bone, you only get the sort of main base storyline that follows Elena wherever she goes, and you hear little bits and pieces of some of the other things that you see in the Netflix series, but yeah, you don't hear at this point anything about any of the thieves, or yes, any of those other kind of storylines that you saw happening. I think those are in other threads of the book, so not even in this trilogy. So I was already aware of that, which I think was probably a good thing, otherwise I would have been like, where is all this stuff? But yeah, it was actually really nice to just kind of see what that main thread looked like prior to being televised, because obviously they do take some artistic license with these things, but actually not too much, it seemed like, which was great. There was some lovely extra detail that you didn't really get in the show, which is always nice, and that for me is always my favourite thing with books, because quite often people who translate stuff from book to screen say there are certain things that don't really work on screen that work really well in a narrative, and just the way you imagine things when you've got a lot more detail like you have in a book, like that could never be replicated on screen anyway, so that's always something that I love. Sometimes unfortunately that also makes me very upset when I see things that I've read and I'm like, oh, I don't like what they did with that, but with this, obviously, I did then have a few characters already in mind based on how they were in the show, but I think, you know, they did some great casting. I think that worked quite nicely, actually. So, yeah, really enjoyed this. Pretty much in terms of the main storyline, it takes you from where you started the show to where you finish in the show. But obviously this is the first part of a trilogy, of which I have the rest. So I'm now going to start on book 2 and kind of see where it goes. And at this point, I'm beyond where the show has currently gone. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see where that goes. But yeah, it was really nice to learn a bit more about the Grisha and the different types of Grisha that there are, and also a bit more about the background of Elena and Mal and where they grew up. And there was actually one kind of key change around why they don't find out that Elena is a sun summoner when she's tested when she's a child, which I actually think worked a little bit better in the book than it did in the series. But again, I think that was probably one that was quite difficult to translate directly from the book narrative into the screen narrative, so I'm not mad about it. But yeah, I got through this so quickly. I mean, it's not a long book anyway, as you can see, so yeah, it was very easy to get through, but that's also always a good sign as well, you know. Particularly when you look at the book I had to give up on not so long ago. Like, every time I picked that up, it just felt like a chore and a troll, and like I wasn't really getting anywhere. I just wasn't connecting with it. Whereas this, I was like, oh! So yeah, I have speedily jumped on to book 2, which I can't remember what it's called. It's called it's called Siege and Storm. So yeah, I literally have no idea what happens other than that it picks up from where we leave off in this one. So yeah, I will report back on that as well shortly. Okay, so this is book 2 of the, I don't know why I find it really hard to say, Grishaverse trilogy, or rather the Shadow and Bone trilogy from the Grishaverse. So this is the first book that goes beyond what you can see in the Netflix series. Obviously, as I mentioned, I think before, the Netflix series also encompasses some of the other parts of the Grishaverse, so other books that have been written, and I think there's some other artistic licensing stuff in there as well. So yes, I had no real expectations of what to expect here. No expectations of what to expect. Best English ever. Anyway, I liked it. I did feel it was a bit like, obviously, middle booky. So some things happened, but I did feel there was quite a lot of getting you from A to B, which, given that I had a box set of the 3 books, was not an issue because I needed to get from A to B. If I had read these, as I sometimes do with these things, like as they come out, I think it would have annoyed me. Not that it didn't sort of stand on its own, but I think in terms of there were little additional bits of storyline, but there's a lot that you're trying to, I guess, decode and puzzle your way around. And a lot of those things I'm not going to talk about because that would ruin the plot for you. But, you know, we'd left Alina in quite a strong position. She'd learnt how to use her powers. She'd refound her Mal. She had a few allies and a few enemies. And we sort of leave them on a ship on their way away, basically, from the mainland to, for want of a better word, hide. So that they don't have to deal with the politics and the carnage and the war anymore. And Alina in particular is in danger, as well as being very powerful, she's also in danger. So they are on their way away from that. As you can imagine, it doesn't go well. We encounter a lot of new characters, so that was interesting. And we started to build some additional worlds. And actually there were some interesting plot points along the lines of some of the characters you meet, you don't know where they fit into the bigger puzzle until the very end of the book. I'm glad you do find out, because that also would have annoyed me if you've been left on a cliffhanger. I'm like, but yeah, no, so you meet a whole new cast of characters, you start to figure out where they fit into things, but yeah, you don't find out until the end. There are a few dramatic showdowns. There are a few things that I did think were unnecessary, so almost like, I don't know, I guess like the obvious moment where you can tell stuff is gonna go badly and you're like, oh, I saw that coming and I was hoping it was gonna go a bit of a different way, but it didn't. But yeah, ultimately you do get from A to B, you learn a few new things, there's still quite a lot that's shrouded in mystery, so you know you're not gonna find that out until the final book. But ultimately we again sort of leave Alina and Mal in a place where she is even more powerful, but also she's kind of stuck in the middle of two and maybe more sides than two, really, if we dig into the detail of it at the end of that book. So yes, if you'd read the first two, you would definitely need to read the third to actually find out how this all ends, how it all fits together, what it all means. What I'm quite intrigued to do, even at this point, before I will tell you now I've already read the third book, I literally went from 2 to 3. But yeah, I did think there were some things in the Netflix series which I don't know if they are contained within another book in the universe somewhere, or whether that was just something that the author had talked to the Netflix people about, so they built it in, but it wasn't really evident in what I'd read. So I am kind of keen to find out if there's more background to be had on some of the things that we've learned about in the main storylines, because I think particularly with this book, because the main storylines are so big, that's what you get focused on, but there are little bits of detail that are handed out throughout where you'd be like, oh, it'd be nice to actually have more time to go into that in more detail. So yeah, I would be keen to find out if she has done that in some of her other books. So yeah, but you know, didn't hate it. Probably of the trilogy is my least favourite, but still, you know, a good book. Does work as a standalone, but I would advise reading the whole trilogy if you're going to do it. And with that in mind, Ruin and Rising. So this is the conclusion to the trilogy. This is even harder to talk about without ruining the plot, but you're ultimately, there's a bit of a puzzle that's seeded in the first book, and you get a lot more elements of that puzzle in the second book, and it really then starts to come to fruition in the third book. You still don't know the actual answer until towards the very end, but you know, I was already starting to guess at what that answer was going to be in the second book. Interestingly, I wasn't entirely right. I was half right, which will make sense if I could tell you what that actually was. But no, this one for me was definitely much better than the second book. Although I would say still probably the first book is actually my favourite of all three, which is interesting because quite often I will be very fond of the final part of a book because, you know, if you've got a really good ending, that often sells it for me. You'll be like, oh, I didn't see that coming, that's amazing, I want to read it all again. I didn't quite feel like that with this one. It did, like, you've heard me say this before if you've read my TBRs, it did round everything off nicely, so there aren't really too many hanging threads, which was great. As I mentioned about the second book, you know, you picked up a lot of secondary characters, some more prominent than others. We weirdly sort of pick up a load more and lose a load more during this book. There's a lot of people who disappear who you don't expect to disappear, or things that happen to people that you may have known for all three books, and then you're like, oh! So definitely good with the drama and the surprises. There were a lot of things I didn't see coming. You are introduced again to different parts of the wider geographical landscape, which is really interesting. You do get to delve more into sort of the history of I want to say the history of the land, but yeah, sort of how the current division of the land has become the way it is, how the nations developed. So there is really a nice sort of introduction to all of that. I do definitely think, again, it would be nice to go into more depth on that. I understand why they didn't in this book, but yeah, I think there's sort of like the basis of something like really cool that could be delved into, and maybe that's exactly what she has done in her other books. I don't know much about her other books. I do know that obviously you get a series that focuses on a particular band of thieves, and those are the ones that you see in the Netflix series. But yeah, she has written some other books in this universe, but yeah, I don't know what those are about, so I shall probably have to go and investigate that now. But yeah, ultimately, I think it was a good end to the trilogy, but I can't quite tell at the moment. It's one of those where I think I would like to read the whole series again and see how it makes me feel, because quite often if I read a series, if I read some books after I've watched a series on TV, I'm normally like, oh, that was amazing. And I didn't not feel it was amazing, but I guess that because they've enriched the series so much with a lot more of the wider universe, I felt like this series was lacking. You know, the core story was great, but it just felt a little bit light, I guess, versus the depth of the universe that you get in the Netflix series. So yeah, it's a weird one. I think I might have felt a bit differently if I hadn't watched the series first. But, you know, really always better to have watched the series before you read the books, because also if I read the books first, then I get very upset by how books are interpreted. Let's not even talk about The Witcher at this point. I mean, yeah, anyway. But yeah, so overall, I would recommend it. Really good, you know, really good, solid fantasy series at the end of the day. Do I love it more than some of the others I've read? No. Would I read it again? Yes. Am I sure if I want to keep it beyond a second reading? It's going to depend on how I feel once I've read that second one. And as I say, I am going to investigate some of the wider universe books to see if that sort of upweights the bits that I feel I would have liked to have seen in this series. But yeah, overall good, would recommend it. And so that is it for this round of the TBR. We are so close to finishing the shelf now, at which point I am going to like remodel my entire shelving system. And then I might look at actually a different way of reviewing the books that I have decided to keep. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Yeah, we might have some deeper dives or some character introspectives or something. I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet. We'll figure that out once we actually get to the end. I've definitely got a few novels still to go and some non-fiction as well. But yeah, we are so close now. So Thank you for watching this one. If you've watched any of the other series as well, also thank you. If you haven't, feel free to go and do that. I've read a lot of books. If you have any awesome recommendations for novels, please do leave those down below. I would love to hear that. If you have any thoughts, comments, have you read any of the books from this month's season's TBR, please do leave your comments about that below as well. I would love to chat. I love to chat about books. Otherwise, I will see you again in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.